A thesis is the central idea that a text is communicating. Within the rhetorical situation model, thesis equates to the writer's message. A thesis is made up of a central claim and whatever evidence is used to directly support that claim. Sometimes a thesis will be stated. This is especially true in academic writing, which requires a stated thesis in the introduction or early in the text that establishes what the rest of the text will attempt to prove. And sometimes you will see a stated thesis in other texts. However, thesis statements are usually implied when you encounter writing in the wild, so to speak. A lot of the newspaper columns and editorials that kind of are the popularized versions of essays today don't have a stated thesis, and instead it's implied. You have to do a little interpreting and use your paraphrasing skills to figure out what the author's thesis is. Let's look at an example of a text that we've already studied this year, John Winthrop's A Model of Christian Charity. What would we say is John Winthrop's thesis? In other words, what was his message? In other words, what was his primary claim and supporting reasons? After reading the text and doing some paraphrasing, we could say that Winthrop's thesis is that the Puritans must fulfill their covenant with God by creating an ideal society on earth. That's his central claim. Because they are God's chosen people, and because failure to do so would bring about their destruction. Those are the two main lines of reasoning, the two big pieces of evidence that he supplies to support his claim. Let's take a look at another example from a text we've studied, Queen Elizabeth's speech to the troops at Tilbury. What would we say is Queen Elizabeth I's thesis? In other words, what was her message? In other words, what was her primary claim and supporting evidence? Well, we might say that her thesis is that the soldiers ought to redouble their efforts to defend against the Spanish, because they will soon be paid what they are owed, because she will, quote, fight alongside them, and because they can defeat this enemy. There I've identified the central claim, and then three different pieces of evidence that she uses to support that central claim. Whenever you're asked to identify the writer's message or thesis, you want to use the same techniques you learned back when we studied paraphrasing arguments. You want to paraphrase that central claim, and then paraphrase each evidence statement separately. And you want to use phrasing that clearly indicates a distinction between claim and evidence. Please note that when identifying the message or thesis, you're only looking for those evidence statements which directly support the central claim. You're not including every single piece of evidence in the whole text. So if we were to paraphrase Winthrop's thesis, we might write it this way. Winthrop's thesis, or message, is that the Puritans must fulfill their covenant with God by creating an ideal society on earth, because they are God's chosen people and because failure to do so would bring about their destruction. Our paraphrase of Elizabeth's thesis might look something like this. Elizabeth I's thesis, or message, is that the soldiers ought to redouble their efforts to defend against the Spanish, because they will soon be paid what they are owed, because she will fight alongside them, and because they can defeat the enemy.